Welcome to A&N In Depth. In this episode, we are going to explore what you should expect if the chaplain at the hospital where you or your family is being cared for is a Seventh-day Adventist. To answer this question, we have with us Ivan Omana. Thank you for joining us, Ivan.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for the invitation.
Ivan, we have Seventh-day Adventist chaplains in Adventist hospitals, obviously, but also in many other hospitals around the world, correct?
Yes, we do. Actually, for example, one of the director of chaplaincy for one of the Catholic hospitals in Alaska is a Seventh-day Adventist.
Okay. And I know that Children's Hospital here in D.C. also has an Adventist there as one of the chaplains.
Yes.
Now, you are a chaplain yourself. In fact, you're the director of Chaplaincy Ministries. What is the department called?
Adventist Chaplaincy Ministries.
And that's at the General Conference, which is the headquarters, the world headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
That is correct, yes.
So if somebody's watching this and their family's in a hospital for whatever reason, they are an inpatient or even outpatient for that matter, and the chaplain there is a Seventh-day Adventist chaplain, what should they expect from that chaplain?
Okay, let me ask you first a question. When you're asking if somebody who is an Adventist or anyone, it doesn't matter if they're Christians or Adventists or whatever.
Tell me about why that would matter.
Well, it would matter because the chaplain, whoever he or she is, they would provide care based on the patient's need. So as a hospital chaplain, many times, I had to go and provide spiritual care to people who had no spirituality or who claimed to have no spirituality. I happen to believe that everyone, even those who claim themselves to be atheists or agnostics, have some sort of spirituality in their lives. But so my care for them was based on their needs.
Okay, so if you have a Seventh-day Adventist, then it will be easier, presumably, and they understand each other's language.
Yes,
much more.
Right. That's right.
It's
That's
more
true.
native, let's say.
Yes, you would also find some Seventh-day Adventists who actually in a hospital they would say, unless it's a Seventh-day Adventist chaplain, I don't want him or her to come visit with me.
So, I see. So you also have that.
Because they feel a little bit more comfortable having someone who speaks their language and understands their special needs. So that's
Is that common among the religions? So you have Muslims that say, I want to see a Muslim, or even Catholics that want to say, I want my chaplain to be a Catholic, or not really? That's
also an interesting question, because there are some things like for a Muslim that only a Muslim religious leader or an imam in their case can do. There are things that for a Catholic only a Catholic priest can do, but providing spiritual care regardless of the people's religious choices is part of what chaplains do. One of the things we learn, whether you're in a hospital or in the military or in any kind of chaplaincy, a good chaplain, period. It doesn't matter the religious belief of the chaplain, but a good chaplain will always provide or find somebody who will provide.
So if they won't administer those rites because it's not part of their tradition, they will find another chaplain that will be able to provide that care.
That's
for
exactly.
That
Let me give you an example. Well, one example that happens a lot in labor and delivery. In labor and delivery, a lot of people come to the hospital. The ladies come to have their babies, and there are complications at times. So when I was doing bedside chaplaincy, one night I get called to Advent Health Celebration. I was the chaplain covering that hospital.
This is in Florida, right?
That's in Florida,
okay.
Yes. I get called in the middle of the night because a lady gave birth to a stillborn. And so the family is there, the medical team is there, and the lady is not allowing anyone to touch the baby until the baby is baptized.
I see.
So
she was a Catholic, presumably. And Catholics believe that if the baby is not, if a person is not baptized, they might not or will probably not be saved.
Exactly.
Enter heaven.
And
now there's a stillborn. So what do you do?
And I'm the chaplain on call that night.
What do you do?
I called. My first reaction would be to call the priest, but I knew enough to know that the priest will never come to the hospital for a dead baby. because they do not baptize dead people.
Sure.
But the family is not allowing the team to do their job until the baby has some water poured in their forehead. So what did I do? I go into that room and I sit with the family first. I speak with them. I do what we call in chaplaincy, in healthcare chaplaincy, we call a spiritual assessment. Just like a doctor will do a physical assessment on you, a chaplain does a spiritual assessment. Right. I ascertained that, just like you said, because the family had Catholic traditions, and I want you to understand because I'm using this in very purposeful. Because the family had Catholic tradition in their family, they had the belief that if the baby wasn't baptized, God wouldn't even recognize the baby. Because in the mind of some Catholics, not all, but in the mind of some, if there is no water that says, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then I give you that name, XYZ, then that's the moment when God writes the name in heaven. But in this case, I realized something. It wasn't so much about them being Catholics as it was about them suffering and going through the grief of losing their baby. I mean, they came to the hospital for their baby to be born, and they had a house ready. They had a room ready in their house, and now they had to go home without the baby. So I sat with them. I processed with them their suffering. I never did the baptism. But they understood that what they had in their minds was not what they needed. When people are going through this immense grief, many a times they don't even know what they want or what they need. So the chaplain goes in there, and the chaplain listens to their stories, and the chaplain helps them to make sense of what is happening so that they can move on. There were other moments where the baby was fine and they wanted somebody to baptize the baby, and I could call the priest, and the priest would come and do whatever it is that the priest does.
Tell me about the theological journey you took them through that day, because often those two are put into an unnecessary antagonistic relationship, care and theology. When in fact everything starts and ends with theology.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So how did you navigate that with the family? Do you remember?
Well, I without giving too much, and this was a visit that took about 2 hours. So, but
and a lot happens in 2 hours.
Yes, a lot.
In fact, the timing is probably the most important part of that whole process.
Well, the one thing that the family understood that night is that the chaplain was there to stay with them. I wasn't in a hurry, although I could be as tired as I could be, but I wasn't in a hurry to get out of there.
So in some sense, you did not incorporate that process-oriented medical environment where this happens, then that happens, then that happens. And I guess the family wanted to put the brakes on that. And that really was the underlying issue. That's interesting. What difference would it make to have the visitation of your pastor in a hospital and have the chaplain visit you? What should people expect as a difference? Because those are not the same.
That's a wonderful, wonderful question, my friend. Because, you see, when I was sick and my pastor came to visit with me, he came through the door with an agenda. His agenda is, I'm going to come visit with my parishioner, my church member who is sick. So I'm going to share a Bible verse with him. I'm going to pray and get out of here. Whereas a chaplain goes in the room without an agenda. I'm going to tell you something, and I hope people would not declare me a heretic. But very, very seldom did I ever enter a room with my Bible. But I did enter with the Bible right here. So I went into the rooms without expectation. Something that you learn as a chaplain, you will learn. I teach chaplaincy That's one of the things I do. And one of the things I teach is I have a few statements for people to kind of keep in their minds. The first thing I teach my students is that when as a chaplain you enter a room, chaplains never make assumptions. Chaplains always check. Going back to the story of the baby, the assumption would have been that you go there because they're Catholics and they're wanting the baby to be baptized. I discovered they were not Catholics. They just had family members who were Catholics who were talking about that. And then I listened to their story. Tell me about the preparations you had in your home. And you may say, well, that's morbid. But no, that's really part of the healing process. And that takes me to the next thing I teach my students. Behind every behavior, there's always a story. And it is in that story where the chaplain finds the ministry opportunity.
Yes. I'm just finishing a PhD in pastoral care, and I've identified self-disclosure as the foundation of pastoral care. So if, in this case, we're talking about chaplains in hospitals, there can be no pastoral care if the patient does not share things about their lives. So this requires great vulnerability and the building of trust, therefore. So to welcome you and to share with you what the preparations were for this baby that will no longer be there, it requires a profound level of self-disclosure, of vulnerability as they do that. And that builds a tremendous connection with the chaplain. In fact, the more they open up, the more they self-disclose, the deeper the connection with the chaplain, and therefore the deeper the trust. So there is a cyclical relationship that happens between self-disclosure and trust, and more self-disclosure, more trust, and so on.
But I want to add to that, Sam, that it is not only about the patient providing self-disclosure. It is also about the chaplain being vulnerable. Okay? I went there, and one of the first things I said to that family was, I am so sorry. This is so sad. It makes me so sad to see you go through this.
So you self-disclose your very emotions that you are experiencing being faced with their tragedy.
Exactly. I did not deny my emotions. One thing I have learned is that my emotions are God's way of communicating with me and helping me to connect with people. Now, many times it is not appropriate for me to use the relationship to deal with my emotion. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is I'm using the emotion to build the relationship. Many times those emotions will elicit some things in me that need to be addressed. And what I teach my students is you take that emotion and you put it in an imaginary library behind your head so that you can deal with it in the appropriate time. But right now, you need to be in the here and now with the person that's in front of you. So that's what the chaplain does. The chaplain is supposed to, it sits down with them and they're in the here and now with that person. The chaplain will listen to their story. The chaplain will provide avenues for them to deal with the story and find ways to cope with the feelings that they're experiencing. So the chaplain, more than giving them a rescue, the chaplain is actually walking with them. And I love the image of shining a light where people can, in that darkness place where they are going through with those bad news or, death and cancer diagnosis and all these things. The chaplain is a sojourner with them and has a light that can show the way.
Seventh-day Adventists are not unique in their emphasis on holistic healing. In fact, it could be a Christian doctrine. It's just that other Christians don't emphasize it as much.
That's right.
So we talked about what to expect from Adventist chaplains in other hospitals. let's now talk about what to expect in Adventist hospitals. So, as far as I understand, in an Adventist hospital, you are seen as a holistic being.
Mm-hmm.
Your emotion,
Mm-hmm.
your relationships, your spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
your body,
Mm-hmm.
the illness you're struggling with, and all of that. It's one unit.
Mm-hmm.
It's not considered three different things.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean Adventist hospitals have a more prominence to the chaplaincy, to the ministry of the chaplains, because it is seen not as a marginal look? If they have if they're struggling, call the chaplain, it'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
In an Adventist hospital, is that part of the healing process, is to explore spirituality if the patient wants it?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens if the patient has no notion of this and doesn't want it at all?
Okay. Well, my answer to this has to be very technical, and I'm going to try to do it as
It's
quick.
called A&N in depth. You can go as deep as you like.
Well, if you're in the United States, it is part of what Medicare and Medicaid requires that every person has what is called at least a spiritual screening.
Is that right?
At the very least, a spiritual screening.
And what is a spiritual screening?
Well, they ask questions of the patient when the patient is being admitted to the hospital that are designed to identify a certain spiritual problem that will automatically trigger a consult for the chaplain.
Mm-hmm.
When I was working at Advent Health at the time, the question was very simple. Do you want to see a chaplain? The problem with that question is that most people didn't know what a chaplain is. And many a times nurses would just check into that so that they could move to the next questions, because it was part of what is called the PHH, the personal health history of the patient. And they had to ask about 150 questions when they were admitting the patient. And one of those was, do you want to see the chaplain? Now that has changed at Advent Health. And I think they're becoming a pace setter worldwide in the way that spirituality is integrated into the work of the hospital.
Interesting. How so?
I went to see a doctor at Advent Health. I have not been able to move my doctors here to Maryland, so I still have my doctors back there. I went to this cardiologist. He was going to do my annual checkup. He's not an Adventist, but he's working for an Adventist hospital.
That's very common, I understand.
He's not an Adventist. And before he lay a hand on me, before anything, he is asking me the question, Ivan, do you have somebody that loves you? The next question he asked.
As part of the consult on the annual?
As part of the PHH history. The personal health history. Do you have somebody that loves you? And the next question he asked me is, do you have somebody that takes care of you? I asked the doctor why he asked me those questions. He said, well, I'm required to ask that because I'm working for Advent Health. So I went to the vice president of mission and ministry for Advent Health, Jay Perez. I asked him, Jay, what is this? He said, well, you know that when you go to the doctor performs certain tests on you to identify some markers for your health. You know, they draw your blood.
Sure. Weight and
so they know
height and all that.
They know how healthy you are by those markers, by those indicators. You know that when you go to the psychologist asks you some questions about how you cope, how you relate with others, because those are indicators of your mental health. Well, if you read in the Bible, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy. That's right.
So if you don't experience love and joy and all of the others, that means you're not spiritually healthy. That's an indicator of your health. That's very interesting.
That's an indicator of your spiritual health.
Yeah.
And that triggers a consult for the chaplain.
I hadn't heard that before, Ivan. That's very interesting.
That is powerful, man. That's powerful stuff. And they have taken it down to a science. So I think they are pace setters in what we call comprehensive healthcare now.
All right, excellent. What would you say to those that are watching this from a hospital? Your final message to them, encouraging them to see a chaplain, and even if they don't feel bad about anything in their journey.
Well, you may want to sit with a chaplain and just have a conversation. So you can tell the nurses that are taking care of you, if you're in the hospital right now, tell them, I want to see a chaplain. I want to speak with the chaplain. And when the chaplain comes, just sit down and talk. You know, I've had powerful conversations with patients, even when we were watching football. I had extreme, profound conversations with my pediatric patients while we played Mario Karts. So just sit with them. Let the chaplain ask the questions. Answer as truthfully as you can. And I guarantee you, you will have a better time. As a matter of fact, there are studies that show that a good visit with a chaplain can cut short your stay in the hospital.
As your body heals better.
As your body heals better. Because you see, in a hospital, we're not just about healing your broken bones or your broken systems. We need to heal you completely. And I also want to say, there may be healing even though you don't experience cure. But that's another story. Maybe we can do another in-depth about that.
That's absolutely beautiful. There may be healing even if you don't experience the cure. In fact, one of the functions of pastoral care is in fact healing. Well, the Greek foundation of medicine is that your body will heal itself. And if your spiritual life and your mental health and all of this is healthier, that will help your physical part of your body to heal itself faster. So it doesn't surprise me.
Exactly.
Ivan, thank you very much for joining us. In
My
ANN
pleasure,
In-Depth.
man. My pleasure. It's great.
And thank you for listening to ANN In Depth in this episode where we discuss chaplaincy in Adventist hospitals and also Adventist chaplains in other hospitals. If you have comments or you would like to share your experience, good or bad, then feel free to go to YouTube, find this video, and you can share it under here. Just type ANN In Depth Chaplaincy. You will find this video there if you're listening on a podcast in another platform. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time.